now. Okay, welcome to District 45 webinar on effective facilitation, presented by Heather Perkins. I'm your moderator, Jeff Hebert, the District 45 Program Quality Director for 2017 to 2018. This webinar is provided to our members to help you lead productive sessions at Toastmasters Leadership Institute and other occasions. This webinar will help you understand how facilitation is different from typical training, how to use facilitation, and how to handle common problems that you may encounter. Our trainer today is Heather Perkins, Distinguished Toastmaster. Heather is a central leader in our district. Heather is currently our district newsletter and the Division F Director in Nova Scotia. She's served in leadership roles from club officer all the way to district governor. She served as district governor twice and was the inaugural Region 9 advisor. In her professional life, Heather is a program evaluator. In this role, she has facilitated hundreds of focus groups. She's drawing on this experience for her session tonight on effective facilitation. So Heather, please tell us all about effective facilitation.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, a couple of introductory comments here. First of all, I will try to connect this to the TLI and the training that's done at that as much as possible. This is not specifically for training club officers. It's generally how to facilitate a discussion or focus group. If you have those skills, then you can use them when doing training at the TLIs, or rather facilitation at the TLI. As Jeff had said, you should stay muted unless you want to say anything. If you want to, you can write a comment in the message box. If you want to speak, to either ask a question or to comment on something that I've said, just put your name in the message box and nothing else. And that way I'll know that you want to speak, and then I can call on you. It saves people from talking over each other. Okay, so we'll get started. So what is facilitation? Didn't do things about this very well. This was supposed to be a true or false question, that facilitation has the same purpose as training. And you were supposed to put in your box whether it was true or false. But my answer seems to have come up here. We can still do that,
Heather. Let's see how observant.
Well, they can still do that. Yeah, put in your, just to get your fingers going, put in the message box whether it's true or false. We have two falses. Okay, the rest of you going to answer?
Yeah, Eliana says false. Yeah.
Okay, I see error in there. Okay, great. Yes, it is false. It's, as stated here, facilitation is about gathering information rather than imparting information, whereas training is the imparting information. With facilitation, you're trying to get people thinking about something and giving you information. So, same thing here. The question that you were supposed to say true or false, and we were not going to bother doing the exercise again. I see I have to make changes to the PowerPoint, but I was going to ask you to put true or false for if you're the content expert as a facilitator, and that is false, because facilitation is guiding people through a process. It's not being the seat of wisdom. So you are not the content expert. You may have the content knowledge, but that's not what you're there for. And this is particularly important with doing the officer roles in the TLI at this upcoming TLI. In the June TLI, if you're doing an officer role, you were there as the content expert. You were there to impart the knowledge on how to do whichever particular officer role. What we want with this TLI is for people to be learning from each other. We want the leaders that are in those roles talking about what's worked for them, what challenges they have, helping them to problem solve any issues that they have rather than you giving them the answer to it. So if you just look, you can see the difference between facilitation and training. So it says facilitation is helping the thinking in a group, whereas training is passing on the learning and content. So that's what I say. The training will be the June TLI. The facilitation is the upcoming TLI. With facilitation, it's more of a collaborative process. Everyone's working together to come up with solutions, best practices, whereas with the training, as the trainer, you're the teacher, the others are the student. Facilitation is about communicating ideas, and training is about applying content. With facilitation, it's more flexible, and that's something that you particularly need to be as a facilitator, is flexible. You'll see that coming up a number of times throughout that idea of flexibility. Training is more linear. You do this, then you do this, then you do that. With facilitation, you have immediate results because you're working on coming up with solutions right there. The training is longer term outcomes. People are taking the information away, applying it in their setting, whether it's in their Toastmasters club or in some other setting, and you're looking for changes as they apply the knowledge that they've received through the training. Any comments or questions on the differences between facilitation and training? If you want to say something, again, just type in your message or just put your name in the message box if you want to speak. Seeing nothing there, then I will assume everybody's good with this. Okay, with getting started on facilitation, the first thing is be prepared. You may not be the content expert, but you still need to prepare before going into your session. You need to know what you want to get out of the session. In some discussion groups or focus groups, it's all about just information gathering. You want to hear people's experience with the program that they're involved in or whatever. With the TLIs, with the club officers, that will be a large part of it. Gathering that information, asking them what their experiences are. But it may also be partly problem solving, because somebody may say, well, this is a challenge that I'm having. What do I do about this? Rather than you as the facilitator then stepping in to answer that question, what you want to do is get the rest of the participants who are in that leadership role to try to come up with solutions so that they're collaboratively doing problem solving to try to help the individual. People will find that they're getting a lot more out of it that way than it just being you up there saying, this is what I would do. If no one has any suggestions, you may end up having to put in some suggestions. But again, try to do it in a way that it's then going to get more discussion going, that you're facilitating the discussion. Create an inclusive environment. Make people feel welcome. Make them feel that they're comfortable in speaking. If you have anyone with any type of disability, whether it's that they're legally blind, so that you've got to ensure that they're going to know, like if you're flip charting things, you've got to make sure that they know what's going on the flip chart all the time. If it's somebody who's in a wheelchair, ensuring that there's room that they can get into. You want to make the place where you're doing this as comfortable as possible. Now, often when we're doing the TLIs, we don't have a lot of say in how things are set up. We get a space, we go in, we have to make do. If it's possible to get into the room in advance, you should do that so that you're aware of any challenges that there might be in room setup. Is there a post right in the middle that keeps people from seeing each other? That, you know, people aren't going to feel included if they're hidden behind a post. So is there something that you can do to make that situation better? It may not always be ideal, but you do the best that you can with what you have to work with. Set guidelines. You want to make it clear at the start what your expectations are and what you want to get out of it, what people should walk away with, but also guidelines in how they interact. So you want to establish ground rules. Can anyone give me a suggestion for a ground rule for a discussion group? One speaker. Aaron says one speaker. That's right. One person speaks at a time. That's very important so that everybody knows what's going on. When you get people talking all over everybody, then people aren't getting the information. Any others? Stay positive. Yep, that's important. It's important to have that positive energy right from the start. Document, document, document. Yes, everyone can contribute respectively. Listen, yes. Respect for each other is also an important part of it. You're there to learn, not to dump on people. So you want to keep that positive atmosphere, and part of that is through people showing respect for each other's comments. Anything else? Constructive input. Yep. That you're there to solve problems, you're there to learn. You're not there to say, this doesn't work. You know, you want people to be more positive, more constructive than that. So when you get that type of information from people, you have to find ways to do it. 1 minute per person to talk, for example. Establish time per participant per person. That's something that you can do if it looks like time is going to be an issue. Often that isn't a problem. That your challenge is more sometimes getting people to talk at all, let alone, you know, although there are those people, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So it might be something that you might want to put in after the fact. It's something that I would probably not want to put in right at the start, because to say it's usually, in my experience, usually not that big of a problem for the group as a whole. As I say, your problem is more of getting people to talk. These ground rules will be very important, and you'll find that you often need to go back to them. And again, that's something that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail. Review the objectives of the session. So that's, again, letting people know up front what it is, why we're there. So with the club officer training, when you're doing the officer roles, for example, make it clear that you're there just to facilitate the discussion, that they're the ones, it's their ideas that are important, that you want them to learn from each other's experiences, that this only works if they share their experiences with their role. So let them know, make sure that it's clear. This is what it is. It's not about you standing up there and telling them how to do their job. Not for this TLI coming up. Again, that's more in the June, you're there as a trainer. Here, you're there as a facilitator. Okay, during the session, have someone flip chart their responses. Does anyone have an idea why you should get someone else to flip chart responses? So you can focus on the people. That's right. It's hard to keep the conversation going, focus on what's going on in the room. Even just when you're flip charting, then you're having to turn away from the group. So you may not be seeing body language that could be telling you something. It helps you to focus on listening well and let someone else put those responses down. Be an active listener, and having someone flip chart the responses for you help you be an active listener. A couple of ways of being an active listener. One is mirroring. I think I'm getting your disease, Jeff, of not being able to say words. This is just giving people back exactly what they said. And Aaron just also added for the flip charting responses about grouping responses. That's often important, and when we get down to the bottom of this slide, we'll actually, there's something there that really speaks to that. So mirroring is giving people back exactly kind of what they said, and paraphrasing it is putting it in your own words. So I understand that you mean this, or something along that line, to ensure that you do understand and that the group understands what it is that the person says. Some people are not as clear in the way that they state things as they might, you know, there's not as clear to other people as they might think it is. So it's important to often paraphrase those and make sure that you know. Be flexible, okay? I think I mentioned that was in the difference between the facilitation and training. The flexibility is an important part. When you're there to gather information or to do some problem solving, I often say at the start of a discussion group or focus group, what you have to say is more important than what I have to ask you. And sometimes you have to modify things because things may crop up that you're not expecting. And sometimes you have to let certain things come out. I was doing some focus groups a few years ago with a group that were getting assistance for some education. And the first question was always, what has this program allowed you to do that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to do? Very first focus group, somebody sticks their hand up and says, well, do you know what I don't like about this program? And I try to get them to talk about, but what has the program allowed you to do? And somebody else is, it became very apparent that everybody wanted to talk a little bit about what they didn't like about the program. If we didn't allow that to come out, it was going to be hard to move on and get the information that we needed. So we had to let that come out. That was also an example, though, of how the first person who speaks often sets the tone for it, because we did 6 focus groups, and in 5 of them we had the, what I don't like. But in the 6th one, I asked that question. I always asked the same question every time, even though I expected people to say what they didn't like. And in the 6th one, somebody says, I got a job last week, and if it hadn't been for this program, I wouldn't have got a job. Well, then everybody started talking about what the program had done for them. So then, because we wanted consistent information from the various sites, I ended up having to ask, even though it wasn't on the list of questions, what don't you like about the program, to see if it was consistent for each. So sometimes you need to change where you think you're going with it, but it's important to be flexible and allow the concerns of the people in the room to come out, but at the same time understanding that you don't want it to be just a bitch session, but sometimes you have to allow a certain amount of that so that you can move on to the more positive stuff. Give clear instructions, and that goes back to the setting the ground rules, reviewing the objectives. But if you're going to do an exercise through the session or anything, then make sure that the instructions for what they're supposed to do during this exercise are clear so that you get the information that you want at the end. Manage your time. If you've got a certain number of questions that you have to get through, then you have to make sure that you have the opportunity. So sometimes you have to say, okay, like this is really good discussion. We need to move on to this next one. Sometimes the conversation just takes you to that next question. With the officer training at this TLI, it's not so much, now I know that what we're planning to do in DNF is we will have a few questions for the facilitators to use, but they're really prompts. They're not that you have to cover each of these questions. They're more of, if things start to lag, here's a question that you can ask to try to keep things going. So that goes back to what your purpose is, knowing what your purpose is. A lot of the ones that I do, we have very specific information that we're trying to get out of people. So we'll have 4 or 5, 6 questions. We try not to have more than that. And we do have to get information on each of them. So sometimes we have to move on. With the officer roles in the TLI, it's more of, as I said, letting them really set the agenda, because it's, what is it that you want to talk about? What has worked for you? What would you want to share? What are your challenges? And then when there is a challenge, okay, what suggestions do people have to deal with that challenge? Have you had a similar situation in your club? What did you do? It's that type of thing. So it's not so much of trying to get through X number of questions. Those questions will be, as I say, more for if people aren't giving the information freely, they're questions that will help elicit information. So, but as I say, it goes back to knowing what the objectives of your session are. And if the objective is for them to learn from each other and for them to talk about their experiences so that that learning occurs, then the questions aren't as important as just getting them talking. Okay, summarize regularly and get agreement. And that's where, when you're summarizing, that's where you can group some of those responses as well. So, we've got these things, and, these all pertain to this particular area, but go over what the person who has been flip charting has been saying, or has written down, to make sure that it reflects what people have said, because the person who's flip charting is going to, they're not putting things down word for word. They're paraphrasing from their understanding. So you want to be sure. I mean, you can do that as you're going along to make sure that whatever somebody puts down is in agreement with what the person said. But kind of at the end of a page or at the end of a topic, then summarize and make sure that everybody's in agreement with what's down there. Because sometimes once they see it written down, they'll say, oh, that isn't really what I meant, or I want to clarify that, something along that line. So it gives them an opportunity to add more information or to change their mind and say, oh, now that I kind of see it in that way, that really isn't what I meant, and I want to take that off of there, which is fine. So that summarizing is very important, and ensuring that everyone's in agreement with what is down there. Any comments on that? Can you summarize now? Yes, I can summarize now, even though I don't have a flip chart to refer to. So you should be able to have one sort of on the side here, but going back to what from the start is making sure you know what the objectives of your session are, setting your ground rules at the start, making sure that you have an inclusive environment, then getting someone to flip chart responses. And you probably want to get people to switch off every now and then, because it's hard for the person who's flip charting responses to be part of the group. And so move them around a bit. Be an active listener. Flexibility is very, very important. Give clear instructions if you're asking them to do something else, and manage your time, and then summarize. Is everyone in agreement with what I've said? Okay. Good. Okay, we'll move on. Encouraging participation. Now let's see if I got this one right, because I put in a true false, but okay, I got this one right. It's okay if only a few people in the group participate, true or false. So put in your answer to that. Okay, I've got 3 trues and 1 false, or 2 false. JP had the more the merrier, but true. So it is a little bit of a trick question in that it is okay, but it's better to try to get as many people as possible participating. And as Erin says, participation can take many forms. Sometimes people will not speak in the discussion group, and they will come up, though, and talk to you afterwards. That's fine if that's the way that they want to share. Now, hopefully we won't get that situation when you're doing the officer roles. I'm hoping that as Toastmasters, everybody would be willing to talk in those situations. Some are going to want to talk more than others. Some won't talk much. But the more people that you can get to participate, the better. If people participate, for one thing, they tend to walk away feeling like they got more out of the session than if they just sit there and listen to everybody else. So if you can get them participating, that's great. But if you've got somebody who really, really doesn't want to, well, that's fine as well. So a couple of ways of trying to encourage participation is, one is doing a brainstorming where you just ask people to throw out ideas. And you're not ranking the ideas, you're not commenting on them as to whether they're good or bad, or you're just asking for ideas and you're writing them down. Once you get those, then you can do something with them. Another one is a round robin, and that's you go around and to each person and ask them, okay, what's your idea on this? But people have the right to pass if they want. Sometimes, and then you sort of keep going around until people don't have anything else to add. So sometimes the first time around, somebody might not say something, but then maybe the second time around, they'll jump in based on something that somebody else has said. It will spark an idea in them. So the second round, they say something. But again, you always want to give them that right to opt out, because you're trying to make people feel comfortable. And if they feel that they're being put on the spot, then they're not going to feel comfortable. And if you've got things, now this is, if you're doing some problem solving generally, you might want to break them up into small groups. Sometimes your group isn't big enough to make sense to break it up into a smaller group. You already have a small group, like for the number of people tonight, for example. If we were doing it in person, dividing you up into 2 groups or something probably wouldn't gain me anything more than having you in the group as a whole. Okay, Patricia's asked, as a facilitator, it's your role to get total participation. It's your role to get as much information as you can, but there may be situations when you want to say to somebody, okay, if we were doing this in person, where I might want to say, Patricia, what's your thought on that? I think with the officer roles, when you're facilitating those, given the group that you have, you could do that a little bit more freely than in another group that you, if you were holding a focus group with, you know, a disadvantaged group or something. And putting someone on the spot like that may make them feel very, very uncomfortable. And so, yeah, maybe you've got participation, although what the participation might be is them saying, no, I don't have anything to say. And then they get up and leave. So you don't want that either. Say that same person might come up to you afterwards and say, oh, I want to tell you about this. Okay. So you have to know your group. And for, you know, when you want to kind of single people out and ask them if they've got a comment to say. It's one of those things that really comes with the experience in doing it. And, you know, it's not that there's always a right way and always a wrong way. Does that help? Patricia, does that answer your question?
Patricia, do you want to unmute and have a discussion? I think this is a pretty important point. And I think Heather's point here is that our job is not to force people to talk, but to get them to share as much as they are comfortable sharing.
Hi. I understand totally what you're saying, Heather, but I also think the skill of a facilitator should have enough ability to determine that, whether that person can participate or be nudged or encouraged to participate more freely, as opposed to, you know, someone who's sitting in the crowd and just sort of nods their head when there's a question asked and nods when somebody else answers, and then if nudged in an appropriate way to allow that individual who's been nodding all along to actually verbalize what their actual thoughts are. And I guess, you know, as a facilitator, I'm looking for skills. So
yeah, and I mean, you're right, Patricia, and you want to, for a lot of the focus groups that we would do at times, we would record them. And I always say to people, nodding your head does not get picked up very well on the recorder.
yeah.
When you're doing that, it's one way of getting people to at least say yes or no. But yeah, you're right. And what you're trying to do is, as you say, nudge them and whatnot. But at the same time, you do have to accept that sometimes you're going to have somebody who just will not be comfortable participating. I mean, sometimes you're doing groups that people are not there completely of their own free will. They feel that they have to be there. And so, you know, then they're not comfortable doing it. As I say, with the officer roles for the TLI, I don't see this being as big of an issue. It's more of an issue when you may be dealing with other groups. And you certainly, what you're trying to do is provide that environment where they are going to feel comfortable finally speaking up. And you can do that when you've seen somebody kind of nodding in agreement with something, you know, several times and whatnot. After a bit, you might want to say, so Patricia, I see that you've seemed to be agreeing with this, you know, what was your experience with it or something, to try to get them to speak. Okay. Anything else on the participation?
No, I'm good. Thanks, Heather.
Okay. Okay. There are always, unfortunately, in most groups, there are disruptors. Can anyone give me an example of disruptors? Jeff, me. Okay, other than Jeff as an example.
I don't know what you mean. I disrupt all the time.
Okay, monopolizer of time. Yep. Anything else? A naysayer. Yep. The argumentative type. Mm-hmm. And the disagree devil's advocate, which is your really argumentative type, or sometimes the naysayer. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, all of those are ones that you can encounter. So there's the talker, which, you know, Patricia said monopolizer of time, and that's what the talker tends to be, is they want to be the one who talks all the time, whether they really have anything to say about the topic or not. They want to say something. Jennifer and I were doing a workshop with homeschooled kids aged like 10 to 16 on presentation skills. And there was this one little guy there that I figured he really should be in school, because it seemed to me he really wanted to talk, and I don't think he got the opportunity to do that at home, because every time he was there, hey, yeah, me. And then you'd call on him and he'd, oh, I forget. So you get those people that want to have something to say for everything. There's the interrupter, which is the person who keeps jumping in on some, you know, not letting people finish their thought, that they've got to start talking. The chatterer is the person who makes the comments, the side comments, to the person sitting next to them, and, well, somebody else is speaking. And I don't know about you, but I see that sometimes at too many Toastmasters clubs. And there's the arguer. And I think really the naysayer, or the negative Nelly, or whatever, they're somewhat similar. I don't have the other one down here, but they're somewhat similar, but they can be different as well, in that, you know, the naysayer is, it does not matter what you say. They have a negative comment to make it. They're not necessarily arguing with you. They just have a negative comment to make. I don't know if anyone has done the facilitating discussion manual, but there is a project where you have these disruptors. If you're the presenter, you get the Toastmaster or the somebody to pick the disruptors for you, so you don't know who they are, and they get their role, and they have to do this. And we're doing it at Schooner one time, and Dan was the negative Nelly person. I didn't realize just how negative Dan could be until that. I mean, he did a really, really good job of it, but, you know, he had something negative to say about, or, you know, just really cynical type comments about anything that was said. And so, you know, you can get these types of people in your group. What do you do about them? Anyone have any suggestions as to what you do about them? And having a roll of duct tape, putting it over their mouth is unfortunately against the law, so can't do that. Ask them to follow the rules. Yep. Any other suggestions? Try to make their comment positive. Okay, that's a good one. Anything else? What Jeff's about getting them to follow the rules is the reason why there need to be ground rules. Because your first line of defense is to refer to the ground rules. And then Patricia says, depending on interruption, advise to discuss further after. Yes. And I think we'll get to that. But your first line of defense is the ground rules. We agreed that only one person would speak at a time. So for the interrupter or for the chatterer, for example, we agreed to respect what each other had to say. So for the person who's the negative, the naysayer type person, you can go back to your ground rules for a lot of those. It's more difficult if you don't have the ground rules, and that's why it's really important to set those at the start. The share with the group is for really the chatterer type, when you can say, oh, Jeff, you have something that you would like to share with all of us? Now, normally whatever Jeff is saying, he doesn't want to share it with everybody. The chatterer type doesn't want, but it makes them realize that, yeah, they are being disruptive and maybe they should stop doing what they're doing. Get a person who's particularly disruptive to be the next one to flip chart, because it's harder for them to be a disruptor if they are up at the front writing down others' comments. Some of them might still manage, but it will be more difficult. Stop the discussion. If you just stop and don't let anything further go on until the disruptive behavior stops, the chatterer stops talking or whatever, it will silence people after a little bit. It might take a little bit longer before they realize what's going on. Along with that, the evil eye can work. And then acknowledge concerns, and that really goes to Patricia's comment about saying you'll discuss this later. Let them know that you understand that they have concerns, but that this is not the time to be discussing this particular thing, and you would be happy to talk to them about it after. Or the other thing is to have what people call having a parking lot. So you say, okay, that's a good point, but right now it's a little bit off topic for what we're talking about. We'll write it here on the parking lot, and if there's time at the end, we'll go back and discuss this. A lot depends on whether you think the concern has relevance to the whole group or whether it's something that's really for that individual that you want to give them the opportunity to talk, but not with the group as a whole. You want to let people know, though, that you understand that they have issues. And it's the same as what, and Ileana said about turning the comment positive. And that comes in here somewhat as well with acknowledging the concerns that, you know, I understand that you disagree with this particular policy of Toastmasters, but nothing that we do right now is going to change that. I can talk to you afterwards about steps that you could take to try to address this with World Headquarters, but right now we need to focus on how do we make our clubs more successful, and how your role as whatever helps contribute to that. So, you know, you bring it back to the discussion underhand, but let them know that you understand that they do have this issue, and it might be a valid issue. It's just not one that should be discussed right there and then. Okay. Any comments or questions on that part? Okay. So, okay, thanks, Ileana. We're getting toward the end here, so some things to remember. Show energy. I mentioned that earlier. You want to, as facilitator, and this is true whether you're a trainer or a facilitator, to have energy, be positive, start things out. Like, you know, if you go in and it's like, you look as though this is the last place in the world I want to be. You're not creating that environment where people say, oh, I'm really happy to be here. They're kind of like, oh, God, what am I going to have to do for the next hour with this person like this? And, you know, sometimes it can be difficult. I was doing a workshop with somebody else, and really it was more of a facilitative thing, partly training, partly facilitation. The group, we had done one in Liverpool, and the group that we had there they were really energetic. They had all kinds of suggestions and they were really participating. And then we went someplace else and went to do this next group. We could not get this group to have any energy themselves to participate. There was some rah-rah motivational speaker in the room next to us. And at one point I said, okay, our goal for the next half hour is to make more noise than the people in that room. You know, I mean, I was trying things like that to just get some humor, nothing. At one point, when the person I was working with, when he was supposed to be facilitating an area, he had done something and then he had them working in groups, and he comes over to me, he says, you've got to take over. He says, I just can't deal with them any longer. So sometimes you get a group where it's really hard to maintain the energy, but if you come in without the energy, you're not going to do anything for the group itself. So you have to have the energy, and you have to try to maintain that energy even if the group isn't showing it. Determine the importance of things not on the agenda. That goes back to what I talked about being flexible. That things may come up that you realize that these are important enough that you have to deal with it, because if you don't deal with it there, then you're not going to be able to get to the other things that you need to. And now, again, with doing the officer roles, you know, where there isn't an agenda as such, then this shouldn't be a particular issue, but there are times when it may come up. It's something that could come up if you're doing training in June, where, you know, something crops up and you realize you've got to deal with this, or people aren't going to listen to the rest of what you have to say. But you need to make that determination kind of on the fly. be flexible. I think I've said that several times. So it's a really important part of facilitation is the flexibility. Remember that differences of opinion are okay. You're not in there to necessarily get everybody on the same page on something. I mean, there are times when that's ultimately what you're trying to lead to, but even then, differences of opinion are okay. And often differences of opinion can be very productive because it generates more discussion, more ideas. It gets people looking at things more critically. And so if there are differences, I mean, that's fine. Let people know that it's fine. It goes back to the respecting what each other has to say, though. You know, I don't have to agree with you, but I need to respect your point of view. And you're there to gather information or to gather ideas. You're not there to impart information to others. And that's it. Yep, that's it. So, any final questions or comments that anybody has? Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, we had some good ideas here. Does anyone have any follow-up questions for Heather? It seems that you've covered all the topics very well, Heather. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a good point, Aaron, about collecting email addresses to share notes. And yeah, that's right. It seems to be collected but never shared. And I know I've been as guilty as others on that at times that I say, oh, yeah, I'll do this. What we're planning to do in Division D and F is when we do the officer roles, we do want people to kind of list. We're going to ask them to ultimately, after they've talked about their successes and challenges and everything, to come up with like the top 5 ways in which they can help contribute to club success. Get them to put that on a flip chart. We're going to put those flip charts up around the room and then give people time to go around and look at them all. People can add additional things if they want to, and then Jennifer and I are going to compile those, and we will make a commitment. I am making a commitment now that for our divisions we will send that out. But yeah, if you make the commitment to do that as a facilitator, then you really should be following through on it.
Yeah, one thing the district has been working on is trying to gather information like that and post it on our district website. We've been very bad. You know, I agree with Aaron. That's been a weak point in our district for quite a while. Mm-hmm. So, yes, Aaron, I did record. I did record this.
It's still being recorded. So I'm
Heather,
on record,
we'll do it.
Aaron.
Yep. Well, I would like, in the interest of feedback, I'm going to post a survey link. Actually, I already posted it, but I'll post it again. So for those of you online, please click on the survey link and give Heather some feedback. The feedback will get distributed to Heather. And if you feel like it, you can add your email address. It's optional, but if you add it, then you will be on my good list, and you'll get some praise and all kinds of good stuff from me at some point.
And Jeff, I saw that Patricia has left, so would you send her the link? Yeah.
I will.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay, well, thanks everybody, and good luck with your TLIs coming up in the next few weeks.
Thank you for doing this, Heather.
Welcome. And we shall talk soon.
Okay.
Okay. Good night, all.